Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a small smudge of engine oil just above her eyebrow. The sun was starting to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the parking lot of Thompson's Auto Repair. She'd been working since 6 in the morning, and her body felt every hour of it. The last customer had picked up their car an hour ago. Old Mrs. Peterson with her ancient Honda that somehow kept running despite being held together by prayers and Maya's skilled hands. Maya had fixed the brake pads and refused to charge full price, knowing the elderly woman was living on a tight budget. That was just how Maya did business. Her father had taught her that taking care of people was more important than making every possible dollar. She walked around the garage, checking that everything was in its proper place. Every tool had a home, every part was labeled and organized. Her military training had taught her that chaos in your workspace led to chaos in your results. Even after being out of the Marines for 3 years, some habits never died. The garage itself wasn't much to look at from the outside. It was a simple metal building with 2 service bays painted white with blue trim. The sign out front read, Thompson's Auto Repair, honest work, fair prices, in letters that were starting to fade but still readable. Maya kept promising herself she'd repaint it, but there was always another car that needed fixing, another customer who needed help. Inside, though, the garage was spotless. Maya had invested every penny she'd saved during her military service into updating the equipment. She had diagnostic computers that could talk to any car made in the last 20 years, hydraulic lifts that worked smoothly and safely, and a tool collection that would make any mechanic jealous. More importantly, she had the knowledge to use all of it properly. Maya had learned about cars from her father, who'd run this same garage for 30 years before a heart attack took him when Maya was 22. She'd been deployed in Afghanistan when she got the news, and it had taken her 3 days to get home for the funeral. Standing in the same parking lot after the service, looking at the garage that held so many memories of working alongside her dad as a teenager, she'd made a decision. When her military contract was up, she'd come home and keep his dream alive. That had been 3 years ago. In that time, she'd built Thompson's Auto Repair into something her father would be proud of. She had regular customers who trusted her completely, and word was spreading to neighboring towns about the young woman who could fix anything with wheels and did it at a fair price. But it hadn't been easy. Some people took one look at Maya and decided she couldn't possibly know what she was doing. They'd ask to speak to the real mechanic or question whether she was qualified to work on their expensive cars. Maya had learned to let her work speak for itself. When someone's car ran better after she'd fixed it than it had in years, arguments about her abilities tended to disappear. She'd also dealt with her share of men who thought a garage was no place for a woman. Most of them changed their tune once they saw her diagnose a problem they'd been struggling with for weeks, or when she could explain exactly what was wrong with their engine in terms they could understand. A few never came around, but Maya didn't lose sleep over customers who couldn't respect her skills. Tonight felt different, though. As Maya locked up the cash register and turned off the lights in the office, she had an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. Maybe it was just exhaustion. She'd been putting in 12-hour days for the past 2 weeks, trying to catch up on a backlog of work before the busy summer season hit. She grabbed her keys and headed for the front door, but something made her stop and look back at the garage one more time. Everything looked normal. The red toolbox she'd inherited from her father sat in its usual spot. The calendar on the wall still showed last month because she kept forgetting to flip the page. The coffee maker was unplugged and clean, ready for tomorrow morning's first pot of coffee that would help her wake up and face another day of solving other people's problems. Maya shook her head and stepped outside, locking the door behind her. She was probably just tired and imagining things. Cedar Falls was a quiet town where the biggest excitement was usually the high school football games or the annual county fair. Crime was mostly limited to teenagers toilet papering houses or the occasional bar fight on Saturday night. Her truck was parked right outside the front door, a 15-year-old Ford that she'd restored herself. The paint job wasn't perfect, and there was a small dent in the tailgate where she'd backed into a post last winter, but the engine ran like a dream because Maya knew every bolt and wire in it. She climbed into the driver's seat and was reaching for the ignition when she heard it, the sound of motorcycles in the distance, getting closer. Maya paused with her key halfway to the ignition. Motorcycles weren't unusual in Cedar Falls, especially during the warmer months when riders came through on their way to the mountain roads. But something about the sound of these engines made her pay attention. They were loud, deliberately loud, with the deep rumble that came from modified exhaust pipes designed to announce their presence from miles away. And there were several of them, maybe 6 or 8 bikes all traveling together. Maya could hear them getting closer, the sound echoing off the buildings along Main Street. She told herself she was being paranoid. There was no reason to think a group of motorcycles had anything to do with her or her garage. They were probably just passing through town, maybe stopping at Pete's Bar and Grill for dinner and drinks before continuing on their way. But Maya's military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now her instincts were telling her something wasn't right. She'd learned in Afghanistan that the feeling of being watched or followed was usually worth paying attention to, even if it turned out to be nothing. The sound of the motorcycles was getting closer now, and Maya could tell they were slowing down. She put her key in the ignition but didn't start the engine yet. Instead, she sat perfectly still and listened. The motorcycles turned into her parking lot. Maya's heart rate picked up, but she kept her breathing steady and her movements calm. 8 motorcycles entered her parking lot and arranged themselves in a semicircle facing her truck and the garage entrance. The riders were all men, wearing leather vests and boots, with bandanas and sunglasses despite the fading daylight. They cut their engines one by one, and suddenly the parking lot was quiet except for the ticking sounds of cooling metal and Maya's own heartbeat. She could see the riders in her mirrors dismounting from their bikes with deliberate slowness, like actors in a movie who wanted to make sure the audience noticed their entrance. Maya kept her hands visible and stayed calm. She'd been in worse situations than this, though admittedly not many of them had happened in the parking lot of her own garage in small-town America. She could see the lead rider approaching her truck, a big man with gray in his beard and the confident walk of someone who was used to intimidating people. The military had taught Maya many things, but one of the most important was how to assess a threat accurately. These men weren't here by accident, and they weren't just passing through town. They had come looking for her specifically, and that meant tonight was going to be very different from what she'd planned. Maya watched in her side mirror as the big man approached her truck. He moved like someone who expected the world to get out of his way, shoulders back and chest out, taking up as much space as possible. Behind him, the other bikers were spreading out across the parking lot, not quite surrounding her truck, but making it clear she didn't have many options for leaving. She took a slow breath and made a decision. Staying in the truck would make her look scared, and scared people were easier to intimidate. Maya had learned a long time ago that how you carried yourself in the first few seconds of a confrontation often determined how the rest of it would go. She opened the truck door and stepped out, making sure to keep her movements calm and controlled. The big man stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to talk without shouting, but far enough that he wasn't quite invading her personal space yet. Maya could see the other riders watching from their positions around the parking lot. "You Maya Thompson?" the man asked. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking for 30 years, and he spoke with the kind of authority that suggested he was used to asking questions and getting answers. "I am," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady. "And you are?" "Name's Tank Morrison. Me and my boys ride with the Iron Wolves." He gestured toward the other bikers, who were now leaning against their motorcycles or standing with their arms crossed, all facing Maya. "We need to have ourselves a conversation." Maya nodded once. "What about?" Tank's expression hardened. "About you running your mouth around town, telling people my boys don't know how to take care of their machines." Maya felt a moment of genuine confusion. She made it a policy never to discuss her customers' business with anyone else, and she certainly hadn't been talking about any motorcycle club. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. I don't discuss my customers with other people." "That's not what I heard," Tank said, taking a step closer. "Word gets around in a small town. People saying the girl mechanic thinks the Iron Wolves don't know a carburetor from a tailpipe." "I've never said anything like that about anyone," Maya replied firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd step back." Tank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You'd appreciate it? Well, isn't that something, boys? The little girl would appreciate it." A few of the other bikers chuckled, but Maya noticed that not all of them seemed comfortable with the direction this was heading. 2 of the younger riders were shifting their weight and glancing around like they wished they were somewhere else. "Look," Maya said, trying to keep things from escalating, "I think someone gave you bad information. I don't know who told you I said something about your club, but they were wrong. I mind my own business and take care of my customers. That's it. Tank moved closer again, now just outside of Maya's personal space. She could smell beer on his breath and see the tattoos covering his arms. Some looked professional, but others were clearly done in someone's garage or maybe even in prison. Maya filed away these details automatically, the way her military training had taught her to assess potential threats. See, that's the problem right there, Tank said. You calling someone a liar? Maybe you didn't say it directly, but you've been thinking it. Looking down on us working men who get our hands dirty for a living. Maya felt her patience starting to wear thin, but she kept her voice level. I get my hands dirty for a living too, and I've never looked down on anyone for honest work. Honest work? Tank's voice got louder. You saying we're dishonest? I'm saying you're putting words in my mouth that I never said, Maya replied. And I'm asking you to leave my property. The laughter from the other bikers stopped. Tank's face darkened and Maya could see she'd just crossed a line. In his world, someone like her didn't get to tell someone like him what to do, especially not in front of his crew. Your property? Tank said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you own this little piece of dirt? You think that gives you the right to disrespect me and my brothers? Two of the bikers moved closer, flanking Tank on either side. Maya recognized the formation. They were positioning themselves to block her access to her truck while making sure she couldn't retreat toward the garage without going through them. I haven't disrespected anyone, Maya said, but you're on my property uninvited and I'm asking you to leave. Tank stepped forward again, now clearly inside Maya's personal space. Up close, he was even more intimidating. At least 6 feet tall and probably 250 pounds, with the kind of thick build that came from years of physical work. Maya could see old scars on his knuckles and a tattoo on his neck that looked like it might be gang-related. You got a smart mouth on you, don't you? Tank said. Maybe somebody needs to teach you some manners. Show you what happens when little girls try to play in a man's world. Maya felt something shift inside her chest. The comment about playing in a man's world hit a nerve that Tank couldn't have known existed. She'd heard variations of that phrase more times than she could count. From drill sergeants who thought women didn't belong in the military, from fellow Marines who questioned whether she could handle combat, from customers who assumed she was just the receptionist at her own garage. I'm not playing, Maya said quietly. Tank misunderstood her tone, thinking her quiet voice meant she was backing down. He smiled, showing teeth that needed dental work. That's more like it. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me and my boys for showing disrespect, and you're going to make sure everyone in town knows the Iron Wolves know how to handle their machines just fine. No, Maya said. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Tank's smile disappeared. What did you say? I said no. I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do, and I'm not spreading messages for you. You need to leave. One of the bikers behind Tank laughed nervously. She's got some fight in her, Tank. Yeah, she does, Tank said, his voice getting dangerous again, but not for long. He reached out suddenly and pushed Maya's shoulder, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make her take a step back. It was a classic intimidation move, designed to show dominance and test whether she would fight back or submit. Maya felt the push and took the step back, but something in her posture changed. Her feet spread slightly wider, her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, and her hands moved to a more balanced position. The changes were subtle, but Tank noticed them. Oh, you want to dance? He asked, pushing her shoulder again, harder this time. Come on then, little girl. Show me what you got. Maya looked around the parking lot, taking in the positions of all 8 bikers, calculating distances and angles. The closest one was about 15 feet away, leaning against his motorcycle. The furthest was maybe 30 feet, standing near the road. Tank was right in front of her, close enough that she could see the individual hairs in his gray beard. Last chance, Maya said, her voice carrying a new note of authority that made even Tank pause for a moment. Walk away now and we can forget this happened. Tank recovered quickly, laughing at what he thought was bravado from someone who was clearly outmatched. Or what, you'll call the cops? You'll tell your daddy? He looked around at his crew, making sure they were all watching his performance. Newsflash, princess, your daddy ain't here to protect you. That was when Tank made his biggest mistake of the evening. He reached for Maya's truck keys, which were still hanging from her finger. Maybe he thought he could take them and search her truck for some imaginary evidence of disrespect. Maybe he just wanted to show his crew that he could take whatever he wanted from this woman, who had dared to stand up to him. The moment his hand touched her keys, Maya's entire demeanor changed. The shift was so sudden and complete that even the bikers who weren't paying close attention noticed it. Her stance became perfectly balanced, her breathing controlled, her eyes focused with laser intensity on Tank's center mass. "Sir," Maya said, and her voice now carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat. "I'm going to ask you one final time to step back and leave my property." Tank was still holding her keys, still thinking he was in control of the situation. Or what? He sneered. Maya's answer was quiet, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. "Or I'm going to make you." Tank's grip tightened on Maya's keys, and for a moment everything in the parking lot seemed to freeze. The other bikers stopped their casual chatter and focused on what was happening between their leader and the woman who had just threatened him. Even the evening breeze seemed to hold its breath. "You're going to make me?" Tank repeated, his voice filled with disbelief and growing anger. "You in what army, little girl?" Maya's response was so quiet that Tank had to lean forward slightly to hear it. "Just me." What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but to Tank it felt like time had slowed down. Maya's left hand came up in a precise arc, striking the back of Tank's wrist exactly where the nerves ran close to the bone. The sudden pain made his fingers involuntarily release the keys, which Maya caught smoothly with her right hand. At the same time, Maya stepped offline to her left, moving out of Tank's direct line of attack while maintaining perfect balance. Her right foot pivoted and she drove her knee upward toward Tank's solar plexus with controlled force. Not enough to seriously injure him, but more than enough to double him over and leave him gasping for air. Tank stumbled backward, clutching his stomach and wheezing. He looked up at Maya with shock and confusion. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He outweighed her by almost 100 pounds and had 6 inches of height on her. How had she moved so fast? How had she known exactly where to hit him? Maya had already stepped back and assumed a defensive stance that none of the bikers recognized, but all of them instinctively feared. Her feet were positioned for maximum stability and mobility. Her hands were up but not clenched into fists, and her entire body radiated controlled readiness. She looked like a coiled spring, ready to explode into motion in any direction. "What the hell?" one of the bikers muttered, pushing himself away from his motorcycle and starting to move toward Maya. "Stay back," Maya commanded, her voice carrying across the parking lot with unmistakable authority. The biker stopped in his tracks, not because he was afraid of her, but because something in her tone made him hesitate. Tank was starting to straighten up, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You little—" He started forward again, raising his right hand as if to swing at her. 8 years. United States Marine Corps, Maya announced clearly, her words cutting through the evening air like a blade. 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, close combat instructor certified, hand-to-hand combat trainer for 3 years at Camp Pendleton. Tank stopped dead in his tracks. The other bikers exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't the same woman they'd been intimidating just moments before. Her entire demeanor had changed. She stood differently, moved differently, spoke differently. The confident mechanic was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Infantry or support?" asked one of the younger bikers, and Maya caught the note of respect that had crept into his voice. "Military police," Maya replied, never taking her eyes off Tank. "Combat arms trained, riot control certified, detention facility security." She paused, letting that sink in. "I spent 2 years keeping peace between groups, eh?" Afternoon, Maya was working under the hood of a pickup truck when she heard motorcycles approaching. Her body tensed automatically, but these engines sounded different, smaller, quieter. She looked up to see 2 motorcycles turning into her parking lot, both ridden by women. The riders parked near the front of the garage and removed their helmets. One was an older woman with short gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes. The other was younger, maybe Maya's age, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail. Both wore leather jackets, but their patches indicated they belonged to a different club entirely. "You Maya Thompson?" the older woman asked as she approached. "I am," Maya replied cautiously, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "I'm Linda Rodriguez," the woman said, extending her hand. "This is Kelly Chen. We ride with the Desert Roses Women's Motorcycle Club out of Phoenix. We heard about your run-in with the Iron Wolves last night." Maya shook both women's hands, noting their firm grips and direct eye contact. News travels fast. Small world, smaller when it comes to bikers, Linda said with a grin. Tank Morrison's got a reputation for being a bully. Word is you knocked him down a peg or two. I defended myself when the situation required it, Maya said carefully. Kelly laughed. Diplomatic answer. We like that. Look, we're just passing through town, but we wanted to meet the Marine who made Tank Morrison back down. That's not an easy thing to do. Tank's got 70 pounds on me, Linda added, and he's got that whole pack mentality thing working for him. Takes real guts to stand up to that alone. Maya found herself warming to these women. There was something genuine about them, a straightforwardness that she appreciated. You know Tank? Know of him? Linda corrected. The Iron Wolves have a reputation in the motorcycle community. They're not criminals exactly, but they're not exactly good neighbors either. They like to throw their weight around, intimidate people who can't fight back. Usually works for them, Kelly added. Most people back down when 8 bikers show up looking for trouble. I'm not most people, Maya said simply. No kidding, Linda laughed. Military police, right? That explains a lot, Maya nodded. 8 years. Learned to handle difficult people as part of the job. The 3 women talked for another 20 minutes. Linda and Kelly shared stories from their own writing experiences, and Maya found herself genuinely enjoying their company. They treated her as an equal, someone who'd earned their respect through her actions rather than someone who needed to prove herself. We should get going, Linda said eventually, checking her watch. Got to be in Denver by tonight. But here's my card. You ever want to take a ride with people who appreciate a strong woman? Give us a call. After the Desert Roses left, Maya felt better about the whole situation. Not everyone in the motorcycle world approved of Tank Morrison's tactics, and she'd apparently earned some respect in circles she'd never even known existed. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly until about 5 o'clock, when Maya heard a familiar rumble approaching. Her muscles tensed as she recognized the sound of the Iron Wolves motorcycles. But this time only 2 bikes turned into her parking lot. Tank Morrison and the older biker Maya remembered from the night before parked their machines and walked toward the garage. Maya moved to a position where she could see both men clearly while staying close to her tools and her phone. We need to talk, Tank said when he was still about 10 feet away. His voice was different from the night before, less aggressive, more uncertain. I'm listening, Maya replied, keeping her voice neutral. Tank looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Sheriff Martinez paid me a visit this morning. I figured he might. He explained some things about assault and battery laws, about how grabbing someone's property could be considered a crime. Tank paused, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. He also told me about your military record. Maya waited for him to continue. Look, Tank said finally. Maybe I came on too strong last night. Maybe I believed some stories I should have checked out first. Maybe you did, Maya agreed. The older biker stepped forward. I'm Pete Kowalski. I tried to tell Tank last night we should just leave, but pride's a hard thing to swallow sometimes. Maya nodded to Pete, remembering him as the one who'd suggested they leave. It is. Tank was struggling with the words, but Maya could see he was trying to do the right thing. Finally, he looked directly at her. I'm sorry. For coming here. For threatening you. For putting my hands on your property. It was wrong. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or continued hostility. What she saw was genuine embarrassment and grudging respect. Apology accepted. Sheriff Martinez made it clear that if there's any more trouble between us, it'll go hard for me and my club, Tank continued. But that's not why I'm apologizing. What you did last night? That took real courage. Standing up to 8 guys when you were alone. My old man was a Marine. He would have respected that. Military teaches you not to back down from bullies, Maya said. Whether they're wearing foreign uniforms or motorcycle leathers. Tank almost smiled at that. Yeah, I bet it does. He paused, then asked, Who told you I was talking trash about your mechanical skills? Nobody, Maya replied. Someone told you I was bad-mouthing your club, but I never said anything like that to anyone. Someone was lying to you. Tank and Pete exchanged glances. Yeah, we're starting to figure that out, Pete said. Question is who and why. Maya had her suspicions, but decided to keep them to herself for now. Might want to be more careful about who you listen to in the future. Might at that, Tank agreed. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Your dad really run this place for 30 years?" He did. Built it from nothing into something the whole community could depend on. And you came back after the military to keep it going? Seemed like the right thing to do. Tank nodded slowly. Respect. Takes dedication to honor your family like that. He looked around the neat, organized garage. Place looks good, professional. I try to maintain his standards. Tank started to say something else, then stopped himself. Finally, he just nodded. Well, guess we'll be seeing you around town. Probably so, Maya agreed. Tank and Pete mounted their motorcycles and rode away without any of the dramatic engine revving or aggressive posturing from the night before. Maya watched them go, then went back to work on the pickup truck she'd been fixing. But as she worked, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Tank's visit wasn't really the end of this story. Someone had deliberately lied to him about her, hoping to provoke exactly the kind of confrontation that had happened last night. The question was who and what they hoped to gain from it. Maya made a mental note to be extra careful over the next few weeks. In her experience, people who stirred up trouble from the shadows usually weren't done after their first attempt failed. 3 weeks after the confrontation with the Iron Wolves, Maya had almost convinced herself that the whole incident was behind her. Business at Thompson's Auto Repair had actually increased, with new customers coming from as far as 2 towns over after hearing about the marine mechanic who faced down 8 bikers. Maya wasn't entirely comfortable with the reputation, but she couldn't argue with the boost to her income. She was closing up on a Thursday evening when she heard a single motorcycle approaching. Maya tensed automatically, then relaxed when she recognized the distinctive rumble of Tank Morrison's Harley-Davidson. He pulled into the parking lot alone, his bike sputtering and backfiring in a way that made Maya wince. Tank shut off the engine and sat on his motorcycle for a moment, clearly reluctant to approach. Finally, he pulled off his helmet and walked toward where Maya stood by her truck. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying none of the aggression from their first encounter. "Evening," Maya replied. "That bike sounds like it's having some serious issues." Tank looked back at his Harley with obvious frustration. "Yeah, it's been acting up for weeks. Starts fine, but after about 20 minutes of riding, it starts missing and backfiring. Had 3 different mechanics look at it and nobody can figure out what's wrong." Maya walked over to Tank's motorcycle and listened to the engine ticking as it cooled. Even without hearing it run, she could smell something that shouldn't be there. "Mind if I take a look?" Tank hesitated. "You sure you want to work on it?" "I mean, after everything—" "A bike's a bike," Maya said simply. "And a customer's a customer." "You paying?" "Yeah, of course." "Then let's see what we're dealing with." Maya spent the next 20 minutes giving Tank's Harley a thorough inspection. She checked the fuel system, the ignition, the air intake, and finally found what she was looking for in the carburetor. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the bike, installing a tiny piece of metal in exactly the right place to cause intermittent problems that would be nearly impossible to diagnose without completely disassembling the carburetor. "Well?" Tank asked when Maya finally straightened up. "Someone's been messing with your bike," Maya said matter-of-factly. "This wasn't normal wear or a factory defect. Somebody deliberately put a small piece of steel where it doesn't belong, designed to cause exactly the problems you've been having." Tank's face darkened. "You sure?" Maya showed him the tiny piece of metal she'd removed. "This was wedged in your carburetor jet. It would cause intermittent fuel starvation, which explains the missing and backfiring. The placement is too precise to be accidental. Who would do something like that?" "Someone who wanted your bike to break down at an inconvenient time," Maya said. "Or someone who wanted to make sure you'd have to keep going to different mechanics, looking for a fix they'd never find." Tank was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. How long would it have taken someone to do this? If they knew what they were doing? Maybe 15 minutes when you weren't around. If they didn't know much about motorcycles, they might have tried several things before hitting on something that worked. "And you figured it out in 20 minutes?" Maya shrugged. "I know what to look for. This kind of sabotage leaves specific signs if you know where to check." Tank was staring at his motorcycle with a mixture of anger and understanding. Someone wanted me to think local mechanics couldn't fix my bike. Wanted me frustrated and looking for someone to blame. That would be my guess, Maya agreed. And if I was angry and looking for someone to blame, I might believe stories about a certain mechanic talking trash about my club. Maya nodded. Seems possible. Tank ran his hand through his gray beard, thinking hard. Danny Kruger. Come again? Danny Kruger. He's been trying to get the Iron Wolves to make trouble for local businesses, claiming they're all ripping us off or disrespecting us. Most of the guys ignore him, but he's persistent. Tank paused. He also works part-time at Morrison's Auto Parts. Would have access to motorcycles when people bring them in for service. Maya had heard of Morrison's Auto Parts, a smaller shop on the other side of town that struggled to compete with the larger chain stores. He got a reason to want my business to fail. Money, probably. Your reputation for honest work and fair prices makes it harder for places like Morrison's to overcharge people. Tank looked at Maya with something approaching admiration. Danny probably figured if he could get us to shut you down or drive you out of business, more customers would have to go to Morrison's. Except his plan backfired, Maya observed. Big time. Instead of intimidating you into closing, all he did was prove you could handle yourself and earn you more customers. Tank almost smiled. Danny's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Maya finished reassembling Tank's carburetor and started the motorcycle. It ran smoothly now, without any of the missing or backfiring that had plagued it for weeks. Tank listened to the engine with obvious relief. How much I owe you? He asked. $20 for the diagnostic and cleaning, Maya said. Tank looked surprised. That's it? Other places charge me $50 just to look at it and tell me they couldn't find anything wrong. I found the problem in 20 minutes. Doesn't seem right to charge you for a full hour's work. Tank reached for his wallet, then paused. Look, I know this is awkward, but I want to say something. What happened a few weeks ago, that was on me. I let someone else's lies turn me into something I'm not proud of. You had every right to defend yourself, and you handled it with more class than I deserved. Maya considered this. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward. Yeah. Tank pulled out $40 and handed it to Maya. Keep the change. And if you don't mind me asking, where'd you serve? Afghanistan. Mostly base security and convoy protection. Dangerous work. Sometimes, but it taught me how to handle difficult situations without losing my temper or my perspective. Tank nodded. My old man served in Vietnam. Always said the military taught him more about himself than he wanted to know, but less than he needed to know. Sounds about right, Maya agreed. Tank mounted his motorcycle and started the engine. It purred like a contented cat. All traces of its previous problems gone. Thanks for fixing my bike. And thanks for not holding grudges. Everyone deserves a second chance, Maya said. Just don't make me regret giving you one. Tank almost smiled at that. No, ma'am. You won't have any more trouble from the Iron Wolves. Over the following weeks, word spread through Cedar Falls about what had really happened. Danny Kruger's sabotage plot became common knowledge, and Morrison's Auto Parts lost several customers who didn't appreciate being manipulated into conflicts with their neighbors. Danny himself left town quietly after Sheriff Martinez had a long conversation with him about tampering with other people's property. The Iron Wolves became regular customers at Thompson's Auto Repair. Tank brought his motorcycle in for routine maintenance, and other members of the club followed his lead. Maya treated them exactly like any other customers, with professionalism, honesty, and fair pricing. In return, the bikers spread word throughout the motorcycle community about the skilled mechanic who stood by her principles. Maya's business continued to grow, and she hired her first assistant, a young veteran named Chris who had just finished automotive school. Chris was eager to learn from Maya, both about fixing cars and about running a business with integrity. One evening, as Maya was teaching Chris how to properly diagnose transmission problems, Tank rode up on his perfectly running Harley. He parked and walked into the garage, carrying a large coffee and a box of donuts. Figured you might be working late again, he said, setting the refreshments on Maya's workbench. Brought you some fuel for the long haul. Thanks, Maya said, accepting the coffee gratefully. What brings you by? Wanted to let you know. Danny Kruger's been sniffing around some of the other motorcycle clubs, trying to stir up trouble between them and local businesses. Figured you should know in case he tries anything else. Maya nodded. Appreciate the heads up, though I'm not too worried about it. Yeah, I don't think many people are going to fall for his stories after what happened with us, Tank agreed. Word gets around that he sabotaged my bike to create problems. That kind of thing doesn't sit well with most bikers. Chris looked up from the transmission he was working on. You're the guy who came here with all those other bikers, aren't you? Tank looked slightly embarrassed. That was me. Not my finest hour. But you came back and apologized, Chris said. That takes character. Maya's a good teacher, Tank replied. She showed me it's better to handle problems with your head than with your fists. Maya smiled at that. My father always said the best mechanics are the ones who can think their way through a problem, instead of just throwing parts at it. Turns out that applies to more than just fixing cars. Tank raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To thinking your way through problems. Maya raised her own cup. And to second chances. As Tank rode away into the evening, Maya reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The confrontation that could have ended her business had instead strengthened it. The man who had threatened her had become an unlikely ally. And the reputation she'd earned for standing up for herself had attracted customers who valued strength and integrity. Maya's father had always told her that respect was something you earned, one honest interaction at a time. Looking around her thriving garage, watching Chris learn the trade with enthusiasm and dedication, Maya knew her father would have been proud of what she'd built. Not just the business, but the relationships and the reputation that came with treating people fairly and standing up for what was right. Thompson's Auto Repair was more than just a place to fix cars. It had become a symbol in Cedar Falls of what happened when someone refused to be intimidated, chose integrity over convenience, and proved that strength came not from size or numbers, but from character and conviction. And Maya Thompson, Marine veteran and master mechanic, was just getting started. A lot tougher than you guys. Tank was still breathing hard, but his expression had changed from rage to calculation. Maya could see him reassessing the situation, trying to figure out how a woman he'd been planning to intimidate had turned the tables on him so completely. You hit me, Tank said, stating the obvious while he tried to process what had just happened. You grabbed my property after I asked you repeatedly to leave, Maya replied calmly. That's assault and battery under state law. I defended myself using minimum necessary force. The precision of her language wasn't lost on anyone in the parking lot. This wasn't someone speaking from emotion or adrenaline. Maya was quoting legal statutes and military rules of engagement with the casual ease of someone who had used them before. Military don't teach you to sucker punch people, Tank said, though his voice had lost most of its earlier aggression. Military teaches you to end confrontations quickly and efficiently, Maya corrected. What I just did wasn't a sucker punch. It was a controlled defensive technique designed to neutralize a threat without causing permanent injury. She shifted her stance slightly, and Tank involuntarily took a step back. Would you like me to demonstrate some of the techniques designed for permanent injury? Tank, maybe we should just go, one of the bikers called out. He was older than the others, with gray hair and the look of someone who'd seen enough violence to recognize when a situation was about to get out of control. Tank shot him a look that could have melted steel. We're not going anywhere until this is settled. It is settled, Maya said firmly. You came here based on bad information looking for trouble. I've explained that I never said anything about your club, and I've asked you repeatedly to leave. Now I'm telling you, get off my property. Or what? Tank demanded, though there was less conviction in his voice than before. You'll take on all 8 of us? Maya's answer was calm and matter-of-fact. If I have to. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Maya stood perfectly still in her defensive position, while the bikers looked at each other uncertainly. Tank was clearly struggling with his wounded pride and the growing realization that he'd badly underestimated the woman he'd come to intimidate. You're bluffing, Tank said finally. Nobody's that good. Try me, Maya replied simply. One of the younger bikers took a step forward, and Maya's attention shifted to him without her body position changing. I wouldn't, she advised. Your buddy there outweighs me by 90 pounds and thought he had the element of surprise. Look how that worked out for him. The young biker glanced at Tank, who was still rubbing his stomach where Maya's knee had connected. Tank's face was red with embarrassment and suppressed rage, but Maya could see him thinking, calculating odds and consequences. Besides, Maya continued, you really want to explain to your families how 8 grown men got into a fight with one woman in a parking lot? How's that going to sound when the story gets around town? That hit home. Maya could see several of the bikers shifting uncomfortably. In a small town like Cedar Falls, reputation mattered. Getting into a public confrontation with a local business owner was bad enough. Losing that confrontation would be infinitely worse. Tank was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. Maya could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. His pride demanded that he reassert control of the situation, but his survival instincts were telling him that this woman was far more dangerous than she appeared. "This ain't over," Tank said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Maya replied firmly. "Because now you know exactly who you're dealing with. I've served my country with honor. I run an honest business and I treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it." She paused, her eyes moving across all 8 bikers. "You've proven you don't deserve it." Tank's jaw worked as if he was chewing on something bitter. Around him, his crew was clearly ready to leave. The fun had gone out of the confrontation the moment Maya had demonstrated that she wasn't a victim waiting to be intimidated. "You got lucky," Tank said, trying to save face. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Maya corrected. "Training, discipline, and experience did. 8 years of military service teaches you a lot about handling bullies." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone with one hand, never changing her defensive stance or taking her eyes off the group. "Now you have 30 seconds to mount up and ride out before I call Sheriff Martinez." After that, this becomes his problem, and trust me, he doesn't like people who threaten local business owners. Tank looked around at his crew and saw that he'd lost them. The older biker was already walking toward his motorcycle. 2 of the younger ones were shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. Only a few of the hardcore members still looked ready to continue the confrontation, and even they seemed uncertain. "Fine," Tank said through gritted teeth. "But this conversation ain't finished." "Yes, it is," Maya replied calmly. "Next time you want to have a conversation with someone, try starting with respect instead of intimidation. You might be surprised at the results." Tank turned away without another word and stalked toward his motorcycle. The other bikers followed his lead, some more reluctantly than others. Engines roared to life and the Iron Wolves began to file out of the parking lot in the same formation they'd arrived in. Maya maintained her defensive position until the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner and the sound of their engines faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to relax slightly, though she remained alert and ready for their possible return. She looked down at her hands and was pleased to see they weren't shaking. Her heart was beating fast, but her breathing was controlled and steady. The old training had kicked in automatically, just like it was supposed to. Even after 3 years out of the service, her body still remembered how to handle a threat. Maya walked to her truck and got inside, locking the doors out of habit more than fear. She sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Tomorrow, word would spread around Cedar Falls that Maya Thompson had faced down 8 bikers in her parking lot. Some people would embellish the story, others would question it, but everyone would know that the quiet mechanic who ran Thompson's auto repair wasn't someone to be trifled with. She started the truck and drove home, already planning what she would tell Sheriff Martinez in the morning. Maya didn't sleep much that night, not because she was scared, but because her mind kept analyzing the confrontation, running through different scenarios and outcomes. It was something her military training had ingrained in her. Always conduct an after-action review. Always learn from what happened. Always be better prepared next time. She arrived at the garage the next morning at her usual time, 6 a.m. sharp. The parking lot showed no signs of the previous evening's confrontation, except for some tire marks in the gravel where the motorcycles had been parked. Maya made herself a pot of coffee and began her normal routine of checking the work orders for the day. At 8:30, Sheriff Martinez's patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Maya had been expecting this visit since she'd called him first thing that morning to report the incident. Tom Martinez had been a friend of her father's and had known Maya since she was a teenager. He was also a Marine veteran himself, having served in the Gulf War before becoming a police officer. "Morning, Maya," Sheriff Martinez said as he entered the garage. He was a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen most everything at least once. "Got your message about some trouble last night." Maya poured him a cup of coffee and gave him a detailed account of what had happened with the Iron Wolves. She kept her report factual and precise, the way she'd been trained to brief superior officers. Sheriff Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. "Tank Morrison," he said when Maya finished. "Yeah, I know him. His club's been mostly harmless so far, loud and obnoxious, but they haven't crossed any serious lines. This sounds like it might be changing." "I don't think they'll be back," Maya said, "but I wanted you to know in case they decide to escalate things." Sheriff Martinez nodded. "Good call. And good job handling the situation. Could have gone a lot worse if you hadn't kept your head. Marine training, Maya said simply. Semper Fi, Martinez replied with a slight smile. I'll have a talk with Tank. Make sure he understands that harassing local business owners isn't going to be tolerated. You need anything else from me? Just wanted to make sure it was on record, Maya said, in case things get complicated later. After Sheriff Martinez left, Maya tried to focus on her work, but customers kept interrupting with questions about what had happened. Word had already spread through Cedar Falls with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By noon, Maya had heard at least 6 different versions of the story, including one that claimed she'd fought off 20 bikers with a tire iron. It wasn't like that, she kept explaining to people. I just defended myself when one of them got physical. End of story. But Maya could see that the incident had changed how people looked at her. There was a new respect in their eyes, mixed with curiosity and a little bit of wariness. The quiet mechanic who fixed their cars had revealed herself to be something more complex and potentially dangerous. Around 2 in the Afi,